Tonight, Donald Trump's potential return to the White House will depend in part on the same branch of government that repeatedly rebuffed his election conspiracy theories, the judiciary. Colorado, with its 10 electoral votes, unlikely to decide the 2024 race, but there are other cases that are still in the works, one pending in Oregon, and others going through the appeals process in Arizona, Minnesota, Michigan, and New Hampshire. And other states could follow suit if folks like our first guest tonight have their way. We'll have more on that in a moment. As for Trump, he has long made clear the fealty he expects from those he considers allies, including on the bench. Once telling supporters, quote, "If it's my judges, you know how they're gonna decide." And he filled the courts with lots of judges that he likes to think of as his.
I appointed nearly 300 federal judges and 3 great Supreme Court justices. That was a big deal. We appointed over 300 federal judges and 3 great Supreme Court justices. I got it done. And it's thanks to the 3 great Supreme Court justices and others on the court.
His fate may likely rest with those justices, including Neil Gorsuch, whose own words were quoted in the majority opinion of the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to kick Trump off the ballot there. Trump's very first pick for the Supreme Court had ruled as an appellate judge that states can, quote, exclude from the ballot candidates who are constitutionally prohibited from assuming office. Trump's campaign says he plans to file on appeal before the high court imminently, but in another case, Trump is in no rush to put his fate in the hands of the very people he gave lifetime appointments. Just today, he asked the Supreme Court to hold off on the issue of presidential immunity that special counsel Jack Smith asked the court to expedite. In California, a number of Democrats are pushing for their state to follow Colorado's lead, and that includes our first guest tonight, California Lt.Governor Eleni. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. And we should note you sent a letter just hours ago to California Secretary of State to, quote, explore every legal option to remove former President Donald Trump from California's 2024 primary ballot. You cite repeatedly the Colorado case, but in that case, and frankly in these other cases as well that I mentioned, it's anti-Trump groups suing the secretaries of state. Is that what you have in mind?
Well, good evening, Brianna. It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me on. We are in uncharted territory in our country, and the decision out of Colorado is a very significant fact. When the Supreme Court of Colorado determines in an examination of the facts that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist and therefore is disqualified from being on the ballot, certainly here in California, we have to look at that information and make the same determination here.
Okay, so if you're saying to look at that and then just make that determination outright, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, for instance, said, quote, whether Trump is eligible to run for president again is a decision not for secretaries of state, but for the courts. I spoke with her today. She's not going to suddenly get involved in the Michigan effort just because of this Colorado ruling. Is she wrong as you see this?
Well, the Secretary of State, certainly I know in California, has the responsibility of determining whether or not people are qualified and meet the threshold test to be put on the ballot, whether or not they meet all of the requirements. And what we know out of Colorado and this very important case is that they have determined he is not qualified because he is an insurrectionist. And that, to me, is a very important piece of information that our Secretary of State needs to consult with the lawyers who she works with to make a determination if we need to use that as a justification here.
On that issue of being an insurrectionist, your letter says, quote, the Constitution is clear. You must be 35 years old and not be an insurrectionist to run for president. Is it really that clear, though, if it is going to require, as we expect it will, the Supreme Court to weigh in?
Well, that's going to be part of the process as well. Look, this is all about our system of rule of law, and we have never remotely had anyone running for president or be a front runner for president who could come close to be considered an insurrectionist. But we all know what happened back on that terrible day when the Capitol was overrun. We all know the information that has come out since. And so for this Supreme Court in Colorado to evaluate those facts, make that determination, that is very material. You know, it doesn't say you have to go through a legal process and be convicted as an insurrectionist. So that has to be weighed into this as well. And I really think it's also important to note that in the history of our country, we have never had a former president indicted for anything. But Donald Trump has been indicted 4 times on 91 felony counts. This is a highly unusual situation. And for the courts and the court in Colorado to make a determination that he meets the threshold as an insurrectionist, we absolutely have to consider that in determining whether or not he's qualified to be on the ballot in California.
It also, in addition, as you say, you know, a conviction isn't required. It also doesn't explicitly state the word president as an officer. I know that's something that a lot of people will look at and say, well, that seems pretty obvious. But clearly, this is something that the Supreme Court will have to weigh in on. So it's not that clear.
Well, again, you know, so much that has to do with Donald Trump is uncharted territory. But I think that's why the Colorado decision was so important and why the decision of the Secretary of State here in California will also be very important.
Yeah, looks so much to wade through. As you said, uncharted territory indeed. California Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.